Okay, I get the nice job of telling you that this is not a free lunch, that you're here for a learning process. What we've got lined up for you tomorrow, or for the rest of the day and into tomorrow, is what we sort of mentioned on the first day, is actually looking at how can you use the information you've gained from yesterday's field trip and today's lectures, and how can you pull them together to start to learn the process of actually planning for restoration measures. And so just quickly, if it comes back up, just quickly want to go through what our expectations of you are for tomorrow. So you know what you're going to get, and if you want to start it tonight because you're in the same hotel or you're in the same bar drinking a beer, you can pull this together. But here we go. Just to refresh, yesterday we went to visit these three sites, wonderful views of some very interesting things, which I'll pop back into in a second, where we actually looked at the top site here, which to me was mostly driven by water quality issues. And I didn't actually think we're dealing with river restoration there, because how can you restore a man-made ditch? So it's a fundamentally slightly different issue that we're talking about here, but very important because it's the top end of the system. Then we went down, lower down into the middle reaches where there's some natural processes and where there is actually some restoration measures taking place. And finally we went to the bottom end of the system where there are a lot more constraints because you're moving into urban areas and actually got agricultural practices constraining what you could potentially do. You've also heard today a whole array of things which actually I think Gertjan summarised very nicely in that last lecture to pull it together for the wiki, to sort of introduce you to the wiki, which I suggest you have a look at over this evening and into very early tomorrow morning. Gertjan will be here tomorrow morning to guide you through it and give you practice, and Natalie also knows roughly how to use it. It's a very intuitive thing, so it's very easy to deal with. But it's a tool that we want you to use to actually start to plan what you could potentially do at these two bottom sites. And what we want to do, if you have a look at it, is actually we want you to split into the groups you were assigned yesterday. And we want then for you to actually take one of those two case studies, but we want both case studies covered, if you understand me. So two people will do one of them and one will do another. So I don't know if you want to decide which one you'd like to do, which group 1, 2 and 3 want to do, or I can assign it. Have you any choice? They've both got lots of things to play with, so there's not a real problem with it. But you get into groups. Tomorrow morning you can actually decide which one you want, but I would appreciate if one of you would select the middle one and one at the bottom. Forget the top one, because it's driven, as I say, by water quality. But then we want to actually use what you've heard over the last couple of days, both actually in the lectures and actually the discussions you've had on sites. Bring all that information with you tomorrow, all your notes that you took and all your photographs and everything else that you might want, because they're going to be quite important for you making a presentation towards the end of the day. And what we want you to do is early in the day is actually get together as your groups and formulate a whole series of issues, the objectives that you think should have been set for those sites and what perhaps ought to be set, what was set and what ought to have been set. Looking at some of the things like the constraints that were acting on you, the measures taken, were they right, were they wrong, could you have done it better, could you have done it worse, and what are the reasons why they chose those measures. And they were all information that was made available to you by the various people that were there over yesterday. We then want you to pull it all together into a very short, and I'm talking about 10 minutes maximum, presentation of the key issues associated with it, using the framework that Gertjan just mentioned at the very end of his slide, to look at the project cycle and actually look at each component part of it and the key elements that will help you guide you through the planning process. And that's key to it. I forgot to put these in different order, but basically this is the top site, the middle site that we actually looked at, where you've actually got reconnection to a floodplain lake here. You've got some bends put into the river here with log jams and the like down here, which Angela loved. And then you've got things like the natural processes. It actually occurred on its own. the do-nothing site, if you remember, which to me looked more perfect than anything that I saw all day. And in fact, all I've heard all day is actually if you leave the river alone, it does it for itself, which is quite an interesting prospect. So we've got this middle area, and we've got this bottom area, which was obviously a fairly new restoration measures. I mean, there are fundamentally some big issues associated with this. I'm not an expert on sand-based rivers, but I have to say that some of these are, I think that there may have been measures that we could actually put in, or additional things you could have put in, which actually might have benefited for this. And you might want to talk to Nikolai, because he's from Denmark, where all his rivers are like this. So he may be able to help you with what they've actually achieved. But what can you do in these sites? Can you do it better than they've actually achieved? I mean, I love the erosion along here and things like this, so it's, there are several things that perhaps you want to discuss and bring forward. So the basic idea is in the morning, you'll arrive here about 9 o'clock, I think is the start time, and you'll have about an hour, hour and a half in your group to start to discuss some of these issues, review the objectives of the study that you were that were mentioned of the middle site or the lower sites, actually look at the pressures acting on it and the issues that are there at each of those sites, and actually perhaps do a problem tree, which is a cause-effect. Very simple. You can't do it complex ones like I showed in my lecture this morning, but a cause-effect relationship, if you can pull that together. So the problems are that, well, there are water quality problems, obviously, but there are other problems with these various sites. Decide on the specific measures you may be able to put forward to address some of those issues. They may not be complete, and you could go and have a look at the wiki to see what other people have done in similar scenarios. Look at your constraints, and these constraints, please look wide. Don't just look at cost. Cost is obviously important, but the regulation measures, what constraints have you got because of people? You know, people don't want flooding, and that very bottom site, which I'm not going to talk about, I still am concerned that those few houses could have actually got flooded if they just left it to carry on going. So we need those sorts of issues to be sort of raised. What are the conflicting societal objectives? Are there other activities such as building houses on that lower site? You've got agricultural practices, you've got all sorts of things taking place. So what's the constraints and the interactions you've got to actually deal with? And after you've sort of pulled these ideas together and you've got some, if you've got questions to ask, the expert panel will be here between about 10:30 and 11:30. Well, after coffee, basically. So they'll be here for about an hour. So you can ask them what they think. We think we ought to do this. Is it a good idea? What do you think the problems will be created by it? All those sorts of questions that you want to ask, the expert panel is sitting at the back of the room, and they will be all there available for you to discuss. We're hoping that Ralph, who ran the whole trip yesterday, will come in as well, so he can actually add more detail. Unfortunately, I won't be here to help you, but there's plenty of expertise at the back. And then finally, you can have this discussion with the people. I've just mentioned, so you can discuss with them, ask questions, and ask questions, and ask questions. Make them focus questions rather than just general X, Y, and Z about their talk. Make them focused about answering questions about the two case study sites. And then what we want you to do is to prepare a presentation looking at what could be done, what opportunities for restoration, what was done, and what other opportunities perhaps there are for restoration, whether it could be done better, what opportunities are there, and bear in mind that there are constraints, and this is what we call an options analysis, basically, looking at the appropriate measures. You might want to go and have a look at the wiki. They may provide you some ideas if you're struggling. You want you to develop that planning framework, as in Gertjan's last slide, a very simple sort of stepwise approach to what perhaps ought to be done. So you're getting into the thought process and the skill base of actually running it as a project, as opposed to just, I'm going to rebuild this river, or I'm going to put this particular measure in this place. And then finally, we want you to prepare a presentation, which will be done up to lunchtime. And then, as you'll see, post-lunchtime, we want you to present one person from each group to present that presentation. Very short, sharp, with discussion, and we can have some interactive discussion thereafter. We will close probably about 3:30, that sort of time, because, of course, people are moving into the conference area here. I will make one final comment, which comes from Gertjan's thing. The answer is not 42. So if anybody's actually read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that's the answer to the ultimate question. The answer in this case, there isn't an answer. Nothing is correct. You can have all sorts of options, and bear that in mind. So do not be afraid of actually making suggestions, because it may be right, it may not be cost effective, but it may be the right solutions. So really think about outside the box, not just, oh, well, in this system we've got to put in a log weir, or we've got to take out this weir, or we've got to build a fish pass. It's more than that. It's much more complex than that. So really start to think outside the box with all the constraints and various things that are going on. Okay? So this is your homework for tonight and tomorrow morning. And yes, I was going to say, do you want?
I have a question. All the measures should be a physical measure, or can be also social or economical?
Absolutely social measures. They could be water quality, because let's be honest, that river has got some real serious water quality problems. Can they actually address those water quality buffer zones? All those sorts of things that are addressing those measures. Yet really think the widest possible way. Yeah, and you're going to have to keep it, because you're only going to have 10, 12 minutes to present. You can keep it fairly simple in terms of the presentation, but try and cover the key elements of the project plan. Yeah.